An Arab millionaire gets married, but the shocking truth behind his bride's sudden disappearance will change everything. What was she hiding? Who can he trust? Get ready for a story full of betrayal, danger, and mind-blowing secrets that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Stick around till the end, because the twist you won't see coming is just around the corner. The air was thick with the scent of roses and expensive perfumes. The grand hall glittered with golden chandeliers, casting soft light on the marble floors. Guests whispered and laughed, their voices echoing against the high ceilings. At the center of it all stood Tariq, the wealthy Arab millionaire, in a tailored suit. His dark eyes were fixed on the door, waiting for his bride. Her name was Layla, a beauty from a faraway land. The music swelled as she appeared, a vision in white. Her face was hidden behind a delicate lace veil, but the shimmer of her gown made her glow. The guests rose to their feet, a chorus of gasps filling the room. Tariq smiled, but his heart raced. He had waited for this moment his entire life. Layla walked down the aisle slowly, her movements graceful yet stiff. Tariq's palms began to sweat. Something wasn't right. As Layla approached, her gaze shifted, darting away from his. He noticed it, the faint tremor in her hands. He reached out to take her hand. She flinched. "Layla," he whispered. Her eyes flickered to him, but they weren't the eyes of a bride in love. They were cold, distant. The ceremony began. Words were exchanged, vows made. But Layla's voice was distant, her words empty. The moment their hands touched, a chill swept through Tariq. He shivered, though the room was warm. The marriage was sealed with a kiss. Tariq felt the briefest pressure of her lips on his. But something in her touch, her reluctance, left him unsettled. After the guests congratulated them, they were whisked away to their private suite. Layla's footsteps echoed in the hallway, too fast, too urgent. Tariq followed, but his instinct screamed at him to stop. The door clicked shut behind them. She was already at the window, staring out into the night. Tariq walked closer, his heart beating faster. "What's wrong, Layla?" he asked, his voice tight. She didn't answer. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, as if she was seeing something far away. Then, without a word, she turned and bolted toward the door. "Layla," Tariq called out, but she was already gone. He rushed after her. The hallways were empty, eerily quiet. He reached the front door just in time to see her slipping through the gates. His feet pounded the stone path as he ran, but she was faster. She didn't stop. She disappeared into the night. Tariq stood there, breathing heavily. Something was wrong. The woman he married was not the woman he thought he knew. He turned and saw a shadow move in the distance. A figure, watching him. Tariq's blood ran cold. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfolding in the darkness. Something he wasn't prepared for. And then he heard it. A scream. "Layla." It echoed across the empty streets. Tariq's heart raced. He ran toward the sound, his legs carrying him faster than ever before. But when he reached the alley, there was nothing. Just silence. The cold night air bit at his skin. Tariq's breath came in ragged gasps. And then he saw it. A piece of paper, fluttering in the wind. It had been dropped in haste. He bent down, reaching for it. The words on the paper were scrawled in hurried writing. "I'm sorry, but you need to know the truth." Tariq's pulse quickened as he read the rest. The paper trembled in his hand. His mind raced. What was this? What truth? And then he saw it. A name. Layla's true identity. A name he hadn't expected to see. A name that shook him to his core. His thoughts spiraled. What had she done? What secret had she been hiding? The shock left him breathless. This wasn't just a runaway bride. It was something far darker. Tariq's mind raced as he stared at the name on the paper. His hands trembled, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. The name was familiar, but twisted in a way that made his stomach churn. It wasn't the name of the woman he had married. It was someone from his past. A ghost he thought he had left behind. Someone he never expected to cross his path again. His heart pounded harder. The world around him felt unreal, as if everything was shifting beneath his feet. He needed answers. But before he could process anything further, he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, heart in his throat. It was a man. A tall, broad figure dressed in a dark coat. His face was shadowed, but the sense of danger radiated off him. "Who are you?" Tarek asked, his voice shaking. The man didn't answer at first. He just stood there, watching him. Tarek's instincts screamed that something was wrong. "You should come with me," the man finally said, his voice low and threatening. Tarek's mind spun. He was being pulled into something he couldn't understand. "I don't know what you're talking about," Tarek snapped, stepping back. But the man was already moving toward him. His pace was unnerving, too fast for comfort. Tarek's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "You don't have a choice," the man said, his hand reaching out. Tarek barely dodged him in time, his pulse racing. The man lunged again, but this time, Tarek managed to push him away. "Get away from me," Tarek shouted, his voice echoing through the silent alley. But the man wasn't listening. Tarek ran, his shoes pounding against the cold stone. He turned a corner, trying to lose the man in the labyrinth of streets. But every shadow seemed to hold another threat. His breath was shallow, his chest tightening with fear. He needed to find Layla. She was the key to this madness. But where was she? What was happening? As he rounded another corner, he spotted something out of the corner of his eye. A familiar figure. It was Layla. But she wasn't alone. There was another man standing beside her, speaking in hushed tones. Tarek's heart skipped a beat. The man looked at him, his eyes cold and calculating. Layla's face was pale, her expression distant. Tarek felt the weight of the situation press down on him. "I told you," Layla whispered, her voice barely audible. "You should have never married me." Tarek froze, his stomach tightening. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice trembling. The man beside her stepped forward, his eyes filled with dark purpose. "It's over, Tarek," he said. "The game is up." Layla looked down, her eyes filling with regret. "I never wanted this," she whispered, almost to herself. But it was too late for apologies. The man's cold gaze never wavered. "Do you want to know the truth, Tarek?" the man asked, his voice low and dangerous. Tarek's throat tightened. His mind screamed for answers. Layla's eyes flickered to him, almost pleading. "The truth," the man continued, "is that your family's wealth, it was built on lies." Tarek's blood ran cold. "Lies?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man nodded. "Everything you've known, everything you've believed, it was all a facade. A cover-up." Tarek's mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of it. What was this man talking about? Layla stepped forward, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I was sent to you for a reason," she said softly. "To uncover the truth." Tarek's breath hitched. His mind spun. His family's empire. His life. Everything was a lie? "Who are you, Layla?" he asked, his voice trembling. Her gaze softened, but there was no comfort in it. "I'm not who you think I am," she said. "And neither are you." Tarek felt the ground beneath him shift. He didn't know what to believe anymore. The truth was slipping through his fingers like sand. And it was far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Tarek's head spun as he struggled to piece together the fragments of what Layla had just said. Her words felt like an avalanche, crushing everything he thought he knew. His family's empire? Built on lies? The shock rippled through him, paralyzing his thoughts. He couldn't breathe. The man beside her stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous calm. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your family has been hiding the truth for years. The wealth, the power, it was never earned. It was stolen, built on blood, lies, and deceit." Tarek staggered back, his mind racing to catch up. Stolen, he breathed, barely able to grasp the words. Layla's face twisted with regret, but her eyes were firm, unwavering. It's the truth, Tarek, she said softly. I didn't want to be part of this, but it's too late now. You've been dragged into something much bigger than you realize. Tarek felt as though the world was spinning around him. His legs weakened, and he leaned against a nearby wall, trying to steady himself. He wanted to shout, to demand more answers, but the words felt trapped in his throat. What could he possibly say to this? You're lying, he finally shouted, his voice breaking. This doesn't make any sense. But the man shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. It's not a lie, Tarek. You just don't see it yet. Everything you've known, everything you've been told, was orchestrated long before you were even born. Tarek's heart pounded in his chest. The air around him felt suffocating, heavy with secrets he wasn't ready to uncover. Layla took a hesitant step toward him, her eyes filled with sorrow. I never wanted to deceive you, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I had no choice. They made me. Tarek felt his knees buckle beneath him. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at her, searching her face for any sign of the woman he had married, the woman he thought he had known. But there was nothing there, only an emptiness that mirrored his own. He turned to the man beside her, his voice hoarse. Who are you? He demanded. The man's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Who I am doesn't matter, he said, his eyes narrowing. What matters is what you've been hiding from all your life. Tarek took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The truth. It felt like a crushing weight, threatening to tear him apart. What are you talking about? Tarek asked, his voice barely a whisper. Layla's gaze softened, but the pain in her eyes was undeniable. The truth about your father, she said softly. And the people who were willing to do anything to protect the empire, even if it meant destroying everything in their path. Tarek's chest tightened. His father, the man he had always admired, trusted, the man who had taught him everything. His entire world crumbled with those words. My father, he murmured, the doubt creeping in. What did he do? The man's smile widened, cruel and cold. It's not what he did, Tarek. It's what he was willing to do. And what he did to you, to your family, to Layla. Tarek's blood ran cold. The thought of his father, the man he had trusted, being involved in something so dark, it was too much to bear. Layla's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I had no choice, Tarek. They knew about you. They knew who you were becoming. And they were willing to do anything to make sure you didn't find out the truth. Tarek's mind was racing now, trying to piece everything together. His father, his empire, Layla's involvement. It was all a tangled mess, one that was too deep to unravel. I don't believe this, Tarek whispered, shaking his head. This can't be true. But the man's eyes gleamed with certainty. Believe it, Tarek. It's all been planned for you. From the beginning. Tarek staggered backward, his heart beating wildly in his chest. He was drowning in confusion, in fear. The truth was staring him in the face, and it was more terrifying than he could ever have imagined. Everything he knew was a lie. And now, the only question was whether he could survive the truth. Tarek stood there, frozen in a haze of disbelief. The words reverberated in his head like a pounding drum, each one sinking deeper into his mind. His father's legacy, his family's wealth, everything he had ever known, was nothing but a web of lies and manipulation. The room around him seemed to close in. The cold air cut through his skin, but he felt nothing. His heart was numb. Layla stepped forward, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some sign of understanding. But Tarek couldn't bring himself to speak. His body felt heavy, as if the weight of the truth was suffocating him. What do you want from me? He finally managed to croak, his voice rough and hollow. The man beside Layla tilted his head slightly, considering him. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Your life is already a part of the plan. You were never meant to be the person you thought you were." Tarek swallowed hard, his throat dry. It was like a nightmare, but there was no waking up. Layla's gaze softened as she stepped closer, but Tarek flinched. "I never wanted this for you," she whispered, the sadness in her voice raw and real. "But I had no choice." Her words sliced through him like a blade, each one carrying more weight than the last. How could she? How could she have been a part of this? Tarek looked at her, his mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. You were sent to me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Layla nodded, her face pained. "They used me, Tarek. They knew what would happen. They knew you'd fall in love with me. And then they would have control over you. Over your future. Over your empire." Tarek's hands trembled. Everything he had ever known had been a lie. The life he had built for himself, the love he thought he had found, it was all a game to them. A game that he was too blind to see. His father's empire, the fortune that had been handed down to him, was nothing but a trap. A trap set by people who would stop at nothing to keep their power. And Layla, she had been part of it. The woman he loved. The woman he thought he had married. Tarek's chest tightened, and a sharp pain pierced his heart. He had been nothing more than a pawn. He had trusted the wrong people. And now there was no turning back. The man beside Layla stepped closer again, his presence overpowering. "It's too late to turn back now," he said. "You've already been marked. There's no escaping this." Tarek's breath hitched. Marked. What did that mean? What had he gotten himself into? The man's gaze never wavered. "You're either part of this or you're gone," he said coldly. "Your choice." Tarek's heart raced in his chest. Layla's eyes begged him, but there was nothing left to save. She had already made her choice long ago. And now it was his turn. Tarek stood there, lost in the overwhelming weight of it all. How could he walk away from this? How could he escape from the shadow of lies that had consumed his life? "Please," Layla whispered, her voice breaking as she reached out to him. But it was too late. Tarek took a step back, shaking his head. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice trembling with pain. And with that, he turned and fled into the night. The wind howled around him, but it was the only thing that seemed real anymore. Everything he had known, everything he had trusted, had fallen apart in the span of a few moments. Tarek didn't know where he was going. He just kept running. The streets blurred as he sprinted, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. All he could hear was the pounding of his heart. Was there any way out of this? He didn't know. But he couldn't stop running. Not now. Not when everything was slipping through his fingers. And the more he ran, the more he felt the cold weight of the truth chase him. He couldn't escape it. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying realization of all. Tarek ran through the streets, his breath ragged and shallow. The darkness around him seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing him whole. He didn't know where he was headed. He just had to get away. Away from the lies. Away from the truth he couldn't bear to face. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, matching the frantic rhythm of his footsteps. The world around him felt surreal, like he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. His mind raced. The words, the secrets, the look on Layla's face, they were all consuming him. She had been part of the scheme. She had deceived him. But the pain of that betrayal was nothing compared to the horror of what his father had done. How could it all be true? How could his life, the empire he inherited, the riches he had built his future on, be nothing but a carefully constructed lie? His father, the man who had taught him everything, had built it all on blood and corruption. The weight of that knowledge crushed him, almost more than he could bear. As he turned another corner, his legs giving way with exhaustion, he stopped. Tarek leaned against a wall, trying to catch his breath, his mind spinning. The alley was empty. The night air was cold, biting at his skin, but it wasn't enough to shake him from his thoughts. How had he been so blind? He had trusted his father, trusted the world he had inherited, but now it all felt like a trap. A cruel game designed to control him. Tarek looked around, but there was no one. No one to turn to. Everything he had ever known was crumbling, and the weight of that truth made him feel smaller than ever before. He was alone. His own thoughts felt like enemies, betrayers. There was no one left who could give him answers. Layla was gone. The man who had confronted him had disappeared into the shadows. And his father's empire was crumbling, but the secrets buried within it would never truly let him go. Suddenly, a noise behind him startled him from his thoughts. Tarek spun around, his body tense, his heart racing. It was a figure in the distance, emerging from the dark. The figure walked toward him with slow, deliberate steps. Tarek's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't escape. Not from the past, not from what had been done. And this man, whoever he was the reminder of everything that had brought him to this moment. The figure finally emerged into the dim light, revealing his face. It was someone Tarek had seen before, but never expected to see again. It was his father's right-hand man, the one who had always been a shadow in the background of his life. But now he was standing in front of him. "Do you know what you've done?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Tarek's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" The man stepped closer, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can escape the consequences?" Tarek swallowed, the fear creeping up on him again. "You're too deep in it, Tarek," the man continued, his eyes never leaving his. "This isn't something you can run from. Your bloodline is part of the game. You've always been part of the plan." Tarek shook his head, his hands clenched into fists. "I never asked for this. I never wanted any of it." The man's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't comforting. It was menacing. "You don't get it, do you? It's too late for regret." Tarek took a step back, his mind racing. His legs felt weak, as though his body was giving up on him. He had been running from the truth, from the shadows, from everything. But now there was nowhere to hide. "Why are you here?" Tarek asked, his voice strained. The man's smile widened, his expression darkening. "I'm here to make sure you understand. This is your legacy, Tarek. Whether you accept it or not, you're part of this. You've always been." Tarek's chest tightened. His father's empire, his inheritance, his very existence, it was all a part of this twisted, dark reality. There was no escape. Not from the secrets. Not from the lies. Not from the truth that had followed him his entire life, just waiting to be revealed. Tarek stood there, frozen, as the man approached him. Everything he had believed in was nothing but smoke and mirrors. The real game had just begun, and Tarek was stuck in the middle of it. Tarek's heart hammered in his chest, his body tense and rigid, as the man closed the distance between them. The cold air seemed to thicken, pressing in on him from every side. His mind was spinning, a whirlwind of thoughts and fears, but he couldn't focus on any of them. The words, the weight of them, were too much to grasp all at once. The man stood only a few feet away now, his presence overwhelming. Tarek wanted to move, to run, but his feet felt as if they were rooted to the ground. "You still don't understand, do you?" the man said, his voice calm, almost taunting. "You think you can turn your back on this? On your legacies?" Tarek's eyes darted around, searching for some way out. But there was nowhere to go. The alley was narrow, the walls closing in, the darkness suffocating. This was it. Everything had led him here, to this point of no return. "I didn't ask for any of this," Tarek whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't ask to be a part of whatever game this is." The man tilted his head, his eyes cold and piercing. "You never had a choice," he said simply. Tarek's blood ran cold. He had known that. Deep down, he had known. But hearing it spoken aloud, so bluntly, sent a shiver down his spine. He was a pawn, a mere piece in a game he hadn't even known he was playing. His family's fortune, the empire his father had built, none of it had been his to claim. It had always belonged to the people pulling the strings from the shadows. "You're in this now," the man continued, "whether you like it or not. And there's no walking away. You can't undo what's been done." Tarek clenched his fists, the anger rising in his chest. "I can try," he spat, his voice trembling with defiance. The man's lips curled into a smile, almost as if he were amused by Tarek's resistance. "Try all you want," he said softly, "but you won't get far." The tension in the air thickened, the weight of his words settling over Tarek like a heavy cloak. But there was something else behind the man's gaze, a flicker of something hidden beneath the surface. A warning, perhaps. A threat. Tarek's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. He needed answers. He needed to understand what had happened to him, to his family, to the world he had thought he knew. "You still haven't told me who you are," Tarek demanded, his voice raw. The man's eyes glinted in the dim light. "I'm the one who makes sure people like you don't forget what they owe," he said. "I'm the one who keeps the game in motion." Tarek's breath caught in his throat. "Oh." The weight of the word hit him like a physical blow. What had his father done? What had they all done? His thoughts felt like a maze, each twist and turn leading him further into confusion. But one thing was becoming clear. This man, this shadow, wasn't just a messenger. He was part of the machine, part of the system that had controlled him his entire life. Tarek's mind was reeling, his thoughts scattered. Was there anyone he could trust? Was there any way out? "I've been watching you," the man continued, his voice low. "You think you can escape, but it's not that simple. You're tied to all of this. And now you're part of the plan, whether you like it or not." Tarek's throat tightened, the weight of those words settling in. He couldn't escape. There was no way out. Not now. Not when everything he knew was a lie. Tarek looked up at the man, his face a mask of defiance. "Then what do you want from me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. The man's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smile. "I want you to accept your place," he said, his tone cold and final. "The game has already begun. And now you're a part of it." Tarek's world tilted as he absorbed the meaning of those words. He was trapped. But he wasn't going to give up. Not without a fight. A plan began to form in his mind, fragile and uncertain, but it was the only hope he had left. He wasn't going to be a pawn forever. There had to be a way out. But for now, he had to play along. He had to survive the game. And maybe, just maybe, he could turn the tables. But that was a question for later. For now, Tarek turned, his steps determined, as he walked into the night. The game had begun. And he was no longer just a player. He was going to change the rules. Tarek's footsteps echoed through the empty streets, each one a reminder of the tangled web he had found himself in. The air felt colder now, biting at his skin as he walked, his mind racing with possibilities. The man's words still lingered in his thoughts, like a constant shadow. "You're part of the plan." He couldn't shake them. They followed him, pressing in from all sides, suffocating him. But he wasn't going to accept it. Not yet. Not until he figured out a way to break free. Tarek didn't know where he was going. All he knew was that he had to keep moving, keep thinking, keep fighting. He turned a corner, his eyes scanning the dimly lit streets. The city felt like a maze. The more he ran, the more he felt like he was being pulled deeper into a trap. There was no escaping the web now. But that didn't mean he couldn't burn it down. Tarek's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out quickly, almost afraid of what he might find. It was a message from Layla. His heart skipped a beat. What did she want now? After everything that had happened? He hesitated, but then opened the message. "Meet me. I have something important to tell you. Something you don't know yet." Tarek's stomach churned. Something he didn't know? Was there more to the story? More that he hadn't been told? He wasn't sure he was ready for another revelation, but he couldn't ignore it. He couldn't keep running from the truth. With a deep breath, he typed a quick response. Where? Within seconds, her reply came. I'll send you the location. Just come alone. Tarek's heart pounded in his chest. Alone. She wanted him to come alone. What did that mean? Was it a trap? He didn't know. But he couldn't walk away. Not now. He had to know. He had to understand. The location was only a few blocks away. Tarek didn't waste any time. He took off at a brisk pace, the message lingering in his mind like a question mark. What was Layla going to say? What truth was she still hiding from him? His thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and suspicion, but one thing was certain. He couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not his father. Not Layla. Not even himself. The world had become a game, and he was trapped in it. As he neared the location, his senses heightened. He could feel the weight of the moment, the sense of something ominous hanging in the air. The alley where they had agreed to meet was dark, almost too quiet. There were no other people around. No sign of life except for the dim glow of a nearby streetlight. Tarek's breath came in shallow bursts, his eyes scanning the shadows. He stood at the edge of the alley, his body tense, waiting. And then he saw her. Layla stepped out from the shadows, her expression unreadable. Her eyes met his, but there was something different in them. Something he couldn't quite place. Tarek, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to be part of this. Tarek clenched his jaw, his emotions swirling inside him. You already told me that, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I don't know if I can believe you anymore. Layla's eyes softened, and for a moment, he thought he saw the woman he had married. But then the cold reality of everything that had happened settled back in. She had been part of it all along. I've been trying to protect you, Layla continued, her voice trembling. I didn't want you to get caught up in this. But there's more to it. More than you know. Tarek's stomach tightened. More? What was left to know? What had she been hiding? Layla took a step closer, her eyes pleading with him. They used you, Tarek. Your father, the people around him, they were never who you thought they were. Tarek swallowed hard, trying to process her words. He wanted to scream, to demand the truth. But the words felt stuck in his throat. Layla seemed to sense his turmoil. There's a file, she said urgently. It has everything you need to know. It's with someone I trust. But you have to go now. You have to get it before they find it. Tarek's pulse quickened. A file? What was in it? He was so close to the truth. He could feel it. The file could be the key to unraveling everything. But who is this person she trusted? Who could he trust? I don't know if I can trust you anymore, Tarek said, his voice harsh. How can I know you're not just leading me into another trap? Layla's face twisted with pain. I swear, I'm trying to help you. But if you don't get that file, everything will fall apart. It's the only way. Tarek stood there, torn between his doubts and the desperate need for answers. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Where is it? He asked, his voice low, his heart racing. Layla hesitated, then spoke quickly. Follow the river. There's an old building on the edge of town. You'll find the man there. But you have to hurry. Tarek nodded, his mind already racing ahead. He didn't know what would happen next, but he couldn't back out now. Not when the truth was so close. And as he turned to leave, Layla's voice stopped him. Be careful, she whispered. They're watching. Tarek didn't turn around. He didn't have time to waste. The clock was ticking. Tarek's feet moved faster now, the urgency in his steps matching the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The river. An old building. The man who held the answers. Every second felt like an eternity as he made his way toward the location. The city was eerily quiet at this hour. The hum of the streetlights, the distant rustle of the wind. Everything seemed to stand still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Tarek's mind raced, but he tried to focus. There was no time to get lost in doubts or what-ifs. He had to get to the building. He had to find the file. His phone buzzed again. He pulled it out without hesitation. It was another message from Layla. Don't trust anyone you meet there. Not even him. Tarek's stomach dropped. Not even him?
Who is she talking about?
Who could he trust now? He stuffed the phone back in his pocket, his thoughts clouded with uncertainty. But there was no turning back. The river was just ahead. He could hear the soft sound of water lapping against the shore as he approached. He followed the path alongside it, his eyes scanning the dark landscape for any sign of the building.
There.
In the distance, barely visible under the moonlight, was a silhouette of an old structure. It looked abandoned, derelict, like it had been forgotten by time. Tarek quickened his pace, his breath shallow as he drew closer. The building loomed larger, the air growing colder with each step. As he reached the door, a chill ran down his spine. The place felt wrong, but he had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, he pushed open the creaking door. The hinges groaned in protest, but it was the silence that followed that unsettled him most. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew hung heavy. The dim light from a single, flickering bulb overhead barely illuminated the space. Tarek's eyes adjusted to the darkness, his senses heightened as he took slow, deliberate steps into the room. He didn't know who to expect, but he had been warned. Don't trust anyone. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, making Tarek freeze in place. It was a man, tall, wearing a long coat that blended into the darkness, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Tarek's hand instinctively moved toward his pocket, where he kept a small knife for protection. The man didn't seem to notice. I assume you're here for the file, the man said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Tarek didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the man, weighing his options. Can I trust him? I'm here for answers, Tarek said cautiously, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. The man nodded slowly, his face still obscured by shadow. Then you're in the right place, he said, stepping aside to reveal a wooden table behind him. On the table was a folder. Thick, yellowed paper. The kind that could hold everything Tarek had been searching for. Tarek stepped forward, his heart racing as he reached for the file. The man didn't move to stop him. Take it, the man said. But know this. Once you open it, there's no turning back. You'll know everything. And you won't be able to forget it. Tarek's hand hovered over the folder, his mind spinning. What would he find inside? The secrets that had been hidden from him for so long. Would it be enough to escape? Or would it just drag him deeper into the game? His fingers wrapped around the edges of the folder, pulling it toward him. As soon as it was in his hands, the weight of it felt almost symbolic. Everything was about to change. The man stepped back, his eyes unreadable. You've made your choice, he said simply. Tarek didn't say anything. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the folder in his hands. What was in it? He didn't know if he was ready to face the truth, but there was no turning back now. With a deep breath, he opened the folder. The first page was a list of names. Names he recognized. His father's closest allies. People who had been in his life for years. But as he flipped through the pages, the truth began to unfold before him, each page darker than the last. The empire, the wealth, the power, it had all been built on lies. His father had made deals with people who were willing to go to any length to secure their hold on the world. And Tarek's marriage to Layla? It had never been about love. It had all been orchestrated, part of a larger plan to solidify their control. Tarek's hands shook as he scanned the pages, the weight of the truth hitting him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just trapped in a game. He had been born into it. The realization was enough to send a wave of nausea through him. And then he heard it. Footsteps. Someone was behind him. He spun around, his heart in his throat. The man in the hat was gone, but someone else had entered the room. It was Layla, and she was holding something in her hands, something that gleamed in the low light. A gun. Tarek's pulse spiked. Had she been a part of this from the beginning? Layla, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Her eyes were filled with something he couldn't read. Regret?
Fear?
Or was it something darker? Don't open that file, she said, her voice trembling. I never wanted this for you. I swear. But now you know too much. Tarek's heart skipped a beat. Had he made the biggest mistake of his life? In that moment, he knew one thing for sure. The game wasn't over yet, and the stakes had just gotten higher. Tarek stood frozen, his eyes locked on the gun in Layla's hands. The weight of everything he had just learned threatened to crush him. She was part of it all. She had lied to him. She had known, and yet she had kept him in the dark. The rage swelled inside him, but it was tempered by the sharp edge of fear. The gun was real. The danger was real. Layla, he breathed, trying to keep his voice steady. What is this? What have you done? She shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. Tarek, please, you don't understand. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't protect you from this. I couldn't protect you from what's coming. Tarek took a slow step forward, his mind racing. His instinct screamed at him to get out, but something in her voice made him hesitate. Protect me from what? He asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Layla lowered the gun, but only slightly, her hands trembling. They will kill us both if we don't stop, she whispered. If you keep digging, if you keep looking into this, you'll become a target. You have no idea how deep this goes. Tarek's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. The file, the secrets, the lies. Layla's betrayal. His father's empire. But the one thing that stood out above all the noise was the fear in Layla's eyes. He could see it now. She was trapped too. You're not the only one caught in this, Tarek, she continued, her voice breaking. I never wanted this life. But when you're born into it, there's no escape. There's no choice. Tarek took another step, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel the distance between them shrinking, but the uncertainty still lingered like a thick fog. So, what do we do now? He asked, his voice hoarse. Layla looked at him, her eyes pleading.
Now, we survive.
Together. Because if we don't, we'll both end up dead. A silence stretched between them, the weight of her words sinking in. Tarek's mind raced, torn between the truth he had uncovered and the woman standing in front of him. The woman who had once been his wife. He didn't know if he could trust her. But right now, she was all he had. And for the first time, Tarek realized that the game wasn't just about survival. It was about finding a way to fight back. He nodded, a grim determination settling over him. We do this together, he said quietly. Layla's face softened, and she lowered the gun completely. Together, she echoed. But the truth was, they were both running out of time. The world they had once known was crumbling, and there was no way to predict what would happen next. All they could do was move forward, and hope that, somehow, they would find a way to make it out alive. The game was far from over, and Tarek was ready to face it head-on. Tarek and Layla stood there in the dim light of the abandoned building, the weight of their shared silence heavy between them. The gun had been lowered, but the air was thick with tension, with unspoken words and unshed tears. The truth had come crashing down like a tidal wave, and neither of them could deny the depth of the mess they were in. As the minutes passed, Tarek couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. There was no more room for doubt, no more time to second-guess every move. If they were going to survive, they had to make a choice. Together. No more lies. No more games. We have to go, Tarek said, his voice quiet but firm. Layla nodded, her eyes filled with something that could have been regret, or maybe relief. She took a slow step toward him, her hand brushing against his. I never wanted to drag you into this, she whispered. But now it's too late. Tarek met her gaze, And for the first time in what felt like forever, he saw the woman he had once known, the woman he had loved, and perhaps still did, despite everything. "I know," he said, his voice a quiet murmur. "But we don't have a choice anymore. We can't keep running from this." Layla gave a small, shaky laugh, the kind that held no humor.
No.
"We can't," she agreed, her voice breaking slightly. They both knew that the world they had once known had disappeared. The life of luxury, the wealth, the power, it was all an illusion. In its place was something far darker, something far more dangerous. And the only way to survive was to confront it head-on. Tarek pulled the file closer, his fingers trembling slightly as he tucked it into his jacket. The answers were all there. The truth was now in his hands. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "We'll make them pay," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Layla gave him a sad, knowing look. "I hope so," she murmured. They turned and walked out of the building together, the door creaking shut behind them. The city stretched out before them, dark, sprawling, unknown. But for the first time, Tarek felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time they were in control. With the weight of the truth in their hands, they stepped into the night, ready to face whatever came next. Together. The end was only the beginning.